A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother. Usually we are diving into a prompt sent over by our housemate Daniel, but today we decided to do something a little different. We actually picked today is topic ourselves because it is something we have been talking about quite a bit lately behind the scenes.
That is right. I am Herman Poppleberry. We were looking at some old family photos recently, and it really struck me how much the world of parenting has changed since our parents and grandparents were raising kids. It is not just the fashion or the technology, it is the fundamental consensus on what it means to be a good parent. The advice that was considered gospel 40 years ago is often seen as dangerous today, and I wanted to really dig into why those shifts happened and where maybe the experts got it wrong along the way.
It is a fascinating lens to look at history through, because when you talk about parenting, you are talking about the intersection of science, culture, and instinct. And as we were preparing for this, I realized that for many listeners, the way they were raised is diametrically opposed to the way they are being told to raise their own kids now. It creates this incredible amount of pressure and confusion. So, today we are going to look at the evolution of parenting best practices over the last couple of generations. We are going to cover everything from infant sleep and nutrition to discipline and the concept of childhood independence.
And I think it is important to start with the areas where we have seen genuine, undeniable progress. There is a tendency sometimes to look back at the past with rose-colored glasses, but in terms of physical safety, the data is pretty clear that we have made some massive leaps forward. Probably the most famous example of this is the shift in how we put infants to sleep.
Right. The Back to Sleep campaign. I remember looking into this a few years ago. If you go back to the 1970s or 80s, the standard advice from doctors was to put babies to sleep on their stomachs. The logic at the time was that if a baby spit up while sleeping on their back, they might choke. It seemed like a common sense safety measure.
It was common sense that turned out to be tragically wrong. In the early 1990s, the American Academy of Pediatrics realized that stomach sleeping was a major risk factor for sudden infant death syndrome. They launched the Back to Sleep campaign in 1994, and the results were staggering. The rate of SIDS dropped by more than 50% in just a few years as parents moved babies to their backs. This is one of those cases where the expert advice flipped, but it was because the data finally caught up to the practice.
It is a clear win for modern pediatrics. But it also highlights why parents are so twitchy today. If the experts could be that wrong about something as basic as which side of a baby goes on the mattress, what else are they wrong about? That skepticism seems to color everything now, and you see it in things like car seats too. I remember being a kid and just rattling around in the back of a station wagon with no seatbelt on, let alone a 5-point harness.
Oh, absolutely. The first car seat laws in the United States did not even start appearing until 1978 in Tennessee, and they were not universal until 1985. Before that, car seats were often just little plastic chairs that hooked over the seat back to let the kids see out the window. They were not safety devices, they were booster seats so the kid would stop crying. Today, we have these incredibly sophisticated rear-facing seats that parents are told to use until the child is 4 years old in some cases. It is a massive shift in the threshold of acceptable risk.
That is a phrase I want to stick on for a second. The threshold of acceptable risk. It feels like that threshold has moved towards zero in almost every category of physical safety. But while we have gained safety, I wonder what we have lost in terms of the parental psyche. We actually touched on some of the stress of modern parenting back in episode 436 when we talked about the parenting gap. There is this feeling that if you do not follow every single evolving guideline to the letter, you are being negligent.
And that pressure is nowhere more evident than in the debate over how we feed our children. This is an area where the pendulum has swung so hard it is practically doing circles. If you look at the mid-20th century, say the 1950s and 60s, Formula was actually marketed as the more scientific, modern, and even superior way to feed a baby. Breastfeeding was seen by some as something for people who could not afford the good stuff.
It is wild to think about that now, given the current breast is best movement. Back then, it was all about control and measurement. You could see exactly how many ounces the baby was getting. It fit that post-war era of believing that industrial science could improve on nature. Then, of course, the pendulum swung back. By the late 80s and 90s, the health benefits of breastfeeding became much better understood, and the pressure shifted entirely in the other direction.
Right, but then we saw the flip-flop on allergies, which I find even more interesting. For about 20 years, the expert advice was that if you wanted to prevent peanut allergies, you should keep your child away from peanuts until they were at least 3 years old. Parents were terrified. Schools became nut-free zones. And yet peanut allergies kept rising. Then, in 2015, the LEAP study came out, which stands for Learning Early About Peanut Allergy.
I remember this. It was a total reversal.
It was a complete 180-degree turn. The study found that introducing peanut products as early as 4 to 6 months, actually reduced the risk of allergy by over 80%. So, the very thing parents were told to do to protect their kids was actually making the problem worse. It is a perfect example of how the expert consensus can sometimes create the very crisis it is trying to solve.
It makes you wonder about the current guidelines for things like screen time. We are in the middle of a massive social experiment with tablets and smartphones. For a long time, the American Academy of Pediatrics said no screens at all under the age of 2. Now, they have had to soften that because, let us be honest, everyone is using them. They moved the goalposts to quality of content and co-viewing. But we are still waiting for the long-term data on what this does to attention spans and dopamine receptors. We talked a bit about the science of this in episode 515, but the consensus is still very much in flux.
It is. And that leads into the bigger shift in how we view a child is emotional and cognitive development. This is where I think the most profound change has happened over the last 2 generations. We moved from a model of behavioral control to a model of emotional intelligence. If you go back to our grandparents' era, the prevailing philosophy was often that children should be seen and not heard. Discipline was about compliance. Corporal punishment, like spanking, was not just common, it was seen as a moral necessity. Spare the rod, spoil the child was the literal operating manual for millions of families.
And that has almost entirely collapsed in the mainstream. The data on corporal punishment has become pretty overwhelming in terms of its link to aggression and mental health issues later in life. But what replaced it is much more complex. We went through the timeout phase in the 90s, and now we are in the era of gentle parenting or responsive parenting. The goal now isn't just to stop the bad behavior, but to validate the child, his feelings, and help them regulate their emotions.
Which, in theory, is a great thing. Raising humans who understand their emotions is a net positive for society, but I do think we need to be honest about the trade-offs. The modern approach requires an almost infinite amount of patience and time from the parents. It is a much higher cognitive load. In the old days, if a kid threw a tantrum, you might have sent them to their room or used a paddle. Now you are supposed to sit on the floor, stay calm, name their feelings, and wait for the storm to pass. It is more humane, but it is also exhausting.
It also changes the power dynamic in the house. There is a conservative critique here that I think is worth mentioning. If you treat a 3-year-old as an emotional equal whose every whim needs to be validated, do you lose the ability to actually lead the family? There is a balance between being a supportive parent and being an authority figure. I think some of the modern advice has drifted so far into validation that it forgets that children actually crave boundaries. They need to know that someone is in charge so they can feel safe.
That is a really important point, Korn, and it ties directly into the shift from free-range parenting to what we now call helicopter parenting, or even lawnmower parenting, where parents try to clear every obstacle out of their child's path. This is a huge generational shift. In the 1970s, a 10-year-old might leave the house on a Saturday morning, ride their bike miles away, and not come back until the streetlights came on. There was a level of independence that is almost unthinkable for most parents today.
It is funny you mention that because even here in Jerusalem, you still see a bit more of that independence than you might in a big American suburb. You see kids walking to the store or taking the bus alone at a younger age. But even here, the trend is toward more supervision. The question is, why did it change? Crime rates in the United States, for example, are generally lower now than they were in the 70s and 80s, yet parents are much more afraid of abduction or harm.
It is the paradox of safety. The safer the world gets, the less tolerant we become of any remaining risk. Plus, we have the 24-hour news cycle and social media. In 1980, if a child was kidnapped 3 states away, you probably never heard about it. Today, you get a notification on your phone within minutes. It creates this perception that the world is a predatory place, even when the statistics say otherwise. And the result is that we have raised a couple of generations of kids who have had very little experience with unsupervised risk or problem solving.
Right. If you never get lost, you never learn how to find your way home. If you never have a conflict with a peer that a parent doesn't intervene in, you never learn how to negotiate. We are seeing the results of this in the rising rates of anxiety on college campuses. We have protected kids from physical scraped knees, but we might have left them without the emotional calluses they need to handle the real world.
And that is where the expert advice is starting to flip-flop again. You are seeing a real movement now, led by people like Jonathan Haidt and others, pushing for a return to play-based childhood and more independence. They are arguing that the overprotection of the last 30 years has been a disaster for adolescent mental health. So, we might be seeing the beginning of a move back toward the free-range model, though with modern safety guardrails.
It is like we are rediscovering that the old ways had some wisdom, even if they were a bit rough around the edges. Speaking of the old ways, I want to talk about the role of fathers. This is one of the most positive shifts I have seen. If you look at the mid-20th century, the father was often a distant figure. He was the breadwinner, the disciplinarian, but he wasn't necessarily changing diapers or doing the midnight feedings.
Yeah, the father was the person you were threatened with when you misbehaved. Wait until your father gets home. Now, the expectation is that fathers are equal partners in childcare. The data shows that fathers today spend triple the amount of time with their children compared to fathers in the 1960s. That is a massive societal shift. And it is not just about helping out the mother, it is about the unique developmental benefits that fathers bring to the table.
Research consistently shows that father involvement is linked to better social skills, higher academic achievement, and lower rates of delinquency. In a conservative worldview, the presence of a strong, engaged father is one of the single most important factors for a stable society. The fact that our culture has moved towards celebrating and expecting that involvement is a huge win. It is one area where the evolution of parenting has clearly made families stronger.
I agree, but it also adds to that pressure we talked about earlier. Now, both parents are expected to be high-performing breadwinners and high-performing, emotionally attuned caregivers. There is very little downtime in the modern parenting model. And when you combine that with the shifting nutritional guidelines, it is a lot to keep track of.
Oh, don't even get me started on the nutrition guidelines. We went from the food pyramid in the 90s, which told us to eat a massive base of bread and pasta, to the realization that refined carbohydrates and sugar are the real villains. I remember being told that fat was the enemy, so we gave kids low-fat yogurts that were absolutely packed with sugar. Now we are seeing the rise of childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes, and the advice has flipped toward whole foods and healthy fats.
It is exhausting for parents to keep up. One year, eggs are bad. The next year, they are a superfood. One year, juice is a healthy serving of fruit. The next year, it is basically liquid candy. It contributes to the sense of parental burnout. You feel like you are constantly failing a test where the answers keep changing.
We also have to mention sleep training. This is another area where the pendulum is constantly in motion. In the early 20th century, the advice was very rigid. You fed the baby on a 4-hour schedule, and if they cried in between, you let them cry. Then we moved into the era of Dr. Spock, which was a bit more flexible, but then the 1980s brought us the Ferber method, or cry it out.
Right, and now we have seen a massive pushback against that from the attachment parenting community. They argue that letting a baby cry it out causes toxic stress, while the other side points to studies showing no long-term negative effects on the parent-child bond. So you have parents today who feel guilty if they let their baby cry for 5 minutes, and other parents who are hallucinating from sleep deprivation because they were told that any form of sleep training is harmful. It is another example of how the experts have left parents in a state of constant second-guessing.
So, looking at all of this, Herman, how do we make sense of it? We have seen medical progress like the Back to Sleep campaign save thousands of lives. We have seen car seats make travel much safer. We have seen fathers become more involved. Those are all great things, but we have also seen the experts flip-flop on everything from peanuts to screen time to discipline styles. What is the takeaway for a parent trying to navigate this in 2026?
I think the takeaway is to have a healthy skepticism of the newest, shiniest expert advice, especially when it contradicts common sense or long-standing tradition. We need to distinguish between hard medical data, like SIDS or car seat safety, and cultural trends masquerading as science. A lot of parenting advice is actually just a reflection of the current cultural anxieties.
That is a great distinction. The hard science of safety is one thing, but the soft science of how to raise a successful human is much more subjective. I think we also need to give ourselves and our parents a bit of grace. Our parents were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. They put us on our stomachs to sleep because that is what the doctors told them. They let us roam the neighborhood because that was the cultural norm.
And 20 years from now, our kids will probably look back at something we are doing today and think it was crazy. Maybe it will be the way we use tablets or the way we overschedule their lives. The pendulum will keep swinging. The goal should be to find that middle ground. Use the safety technology, listen to the legitimate medical breakthroughs, but don't lose sight of the basic needs that haven't changed in thousands of years: love, boundaries, a sense of belonging, and the freedom to fail and get back up.
It is about building resilience. If there is one thing that I think the modern evolution has struggled with, it is that. We have become so good at preventing discomfort that we have inadvertently made it harder for kids to develop grit. I think the next generation of parenting advice is going to be focused on how to reintroduce healthy challenges into a child's life.
I think you are right. We are already seeing that with the push for more independent play and the focus on growth mindset. It is a recognition that a perfectly smooth path doesn't lead to a strong hiker. You need the rocks and the hills to build the muscle.
This has been a really enlightening discussion for me, Herman. It makes me realize how much of what we think of as fixed truth is actually just a snapshot in time. We covered a lot of ground today, from the life-saving shift of back to sleep to the complicated flip-flops on nutrition and independence. It is a lot for any parent to carry.
It really is. And if you are listening to this and feeling that weight, just remember that the most important factor in a child is success hasn't changed. It is the presence of stable, loving adults who are invested in their well-being. All the rest of it, the car seats and the peanut introduction and the screen time limits, those are just tools. They aren't the foundation.
That is a perfect way to wrap it up. We really enjoyed picking our own topic today and diving into something that hits close to home for so many people. If you found this discussion interesting, you might want to check out some of our older episodes. Episode 863 is a great one on infant safety and CPR, and episode 517 dives into the whole debate around co-sleeping and those massive family beds that people are using now.
Yeah, the 12-foot mattress. That was a fun one. You can find all of those and more at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have a full archive there, and you can even send us a message if there is a topic you want us to tackle in the future.
And before we go, we have to ask, if you are enjoying the show, please take a minute to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show, and it means a lot to us to hear from you. We have been doing this for over 900 episodes now. And the community that has grown around My Weird Prompts is really something special.
It really is. Thanks for spending some time with us today. We will be back next time with another prompt, likely from our friend Daniel, but it was great to take the reins for a bit today.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. We will talk to you next time.
Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and maybe give your parents a call and thank them for doing their best, even if they did put you to sleep on your stomach.
Or for letting you ride in the back of that station wagon. See ya.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flow. slow.